I expected the Nike ACG Pegasus Trail to win this comparison easily. It has more aggressive grip, comes from one of the biggest brands in trail running, and on paper it seemed to have a clear advantage. But after testing it side by side with the Mountain Coast H1, this comparison didn't go how I expected at all, and maybe not for the reasons you'd expect either. So when we look underneath the shoes, in the Nike, we've got 35 mils in the rear foot, 27 in the forefoot, giving you an 8 mil drop. In contrast, we've got a 6 mil drop in the Mountain Coast, with 35 mils in the rear foot, 29 in the forefoot. However, the big story here is the weight difference of these two shoes, which is 65 grams overall. The Mountain Coast is 284 grams, and it's 349 grams in a size 12 US in the Nike. So that's a really heavy shoe overall, especially when you think about its road to trail use. Then we've got the Nike React X 3.0 Cushion in the midsole. So this is a very steady, firm, balanced cushioning that we've seen in the previous iterations of the Nike Pegasus Trail, so you know what you're getting with this. In contrast with the Mountain Coast, it has the Circle Cell, which is 100% renewable feedstock. One, it's useful if you're interested in an eco-friendly shoe, but two, it's extremely bouncy, springy, and just really fun to run in. And part of the reason is the aggressive geometry of this shoe. So you can see how you've got a much more aggressive forefoot rocker where the shoe curves upward. So a lot of toe spring in there, and that's where it holds the toes and side extension. Not ideal if you've got sensitivity in the ball of the foot, but if you want a shoe that moves really quickly from the back to the front, this does an exceptional job. We've got a much flatter shoe in the Nike, so that increases the amount of contact that you have with the ground, so you get a better ground contact feel, which makes it feel a bit more stable underfoot, even though it's a classic neutral shoe. So very contrasting in terms of the feel underfoot, and that's also complemented by the under aspect of the shoe. So they're relatively narrow in the heel, and they both broaden out in the forefoot. However, the traction, grip, and lug depth are very different. So you've got 1.5mm Versa grip in the Mountain Coast, whereas we've got 3.5mm lugs in the ATR 2.0 rubber grip in the Nike. So you get really good traction underfoot, maybe not ideal if you go on muddy terrain, but when I took it out from gravel onto forest paths, onto relatively technical terrain, it withstood it without any issues whatsoever. And I'm going to talk about how that affects its performance, but I need to tell you about the top of the shoe first because they're very different. The Nike does really well at widening the toe box compared to the previous iterations of this. So lots of space in the toe box, although the volume is a little bit low, and then you got a tremendous lockdown on the midfoot and the heel. So if you're going downhill at speed, changing direction, you're locked into the shoe, and you've got lots of space for your toes to splay alongside that nice ground contact feel, makes it an excellent option. Whereas in the Mountain Coast, you've got lots of space around the ball of the foot, but it does taper a little bit too much for my liking. However, they have done an excellent job with the laces. You've got a two-tier system. One that you can tighten up at that bottom, and then another one where you can tighten at the top. So if you have someone who has a narrow foot, for instance, you can really lock down the shoe to your liking. However, if you've got mountain syndrome and you need extra space, you can allow that accommodation in the ball of the foot and then tighten up the top of the shoe to make sure you got a great lockdown overall. So for me personally, I really enjoyed that because I've got a slightly broader ball of the foot. Then when it comes to use cases, personally I found walking around, hiking, easy runs, really enjoyed the Nike. However, it was a completely different story when I took out the Mountain Coast. I was really surprised at how responsive and bouncy this shoe is. Especially on the road, it feels like a road shoe because the lugs are so short. On the gravel, it had really good grip, it felt like I was on the road. And on the forest paths, no problem at all. When I went onto the deeper trails, as you'd expect, I was slipping a little bit in wet mud. However, it's not expected to deal with this type of terrain. So overall, it really surprised me from that aspect. The lightness of the shoe made a big difference as well. So overall, I think the Nike is probably the better all-rounder as a trail shoe. The grip is better for different terrain, and it's a shoe I'd personally choose more for hiking and for those easy runs. But what really surprised me about the Mountain Coast was just how fun it was to run in on the gravel and on the road. So if you live in an area where you've got lots of gravel sections, forest paths, and you want a lightweight, fun, springy and aggressive shoe, this one's going to be really hard to beat. And honestly, that's what made this comparison even closer than I thought it would be. But let me know your thoughts on the two shoes in the comment section below. Which would you go for? I've got links to both of them in the description below if you want to check out the latest prices. And otherwise, thank you very much for tuning in once again.